Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the stories that set them free. I'm your host and story alchemist, Lisa Cooper Ellison. Listeners, I want to begin this episode with a couple of questions for you. Which of your memories shimmer inside you? Take a moment to think about which ones these are. Okay, now that you have a few in mind, I want you to answer this question. Which ones haunt you? You see, those shimmering, haunting memories are the raw ingredients of the stories you're meant to tell. And this is something I explored with today's guest, Marianna Marlowe, author of Portrait of a Feminist. During our conversation, we explore how shimmering images became the foundation for her Memoir-in-Essays and how this practice helped her shift from an academic writer to the more personal kinds of writing she needed to do in order to write her memoir. We also dive deep into what feminism is, how to write from a feminist lens, and the surprising things that constitute feminist self-care. You're definitely going to want to hear what those are. So grab your pen, open your heart, and get ready to interrogate your stories alongside us. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, the podcast for writers who want to write and live the story that sets them free. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison, a writer, transformational and trauma-informed coach, story alchemist, and fellow traveler on the winding road of healing and creativity. Each week, I'll share tools, practices, and conversations that will help you let go of what no longer serves you as you create stories that change lives, especially your own. Together, we'll explore how to trust your creative voice, support your mental health and resilience, work with your nervous system and unique design, and stay connected to your deepest calling as a writer, even when life gets messy. It's time, my friends, to write and live the story that sets you free. I'm honored to walk that journey alongside you, one story and one episode at a time. Well, hello, Marianna. Welcome to the Writing and Resilience podcast. I am so happy to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, it's a joy for me because you are one of my newsletter followers and you've been a newsletter follower for a while. And so I was just so excited and so honored that I get an opportunity to celebrate this book that you have worked so hard to publish. And so that's Portrait of a Feminist. I'm going to hold it up for anyone who is listening on YouTube. I love the cover, by the way. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. I published with She Writes Press, and they do have a collaborative process around the cover. So I'm really happy with the end result.
Well, I'm going to ask you a little about that in a moment. But before we get started, I always like to give my guests a chance to tell us a little about themselves. So, what would you like us to know about you and also a portrait of a feminist?
I've been a lifelong feminist and a lifelong reader. I wrote academically. I have my PhD in literature, and then my career kind of went off to the side when I became a mom. And fast forward my children's childhoods, and when the same year I turned 50, my oldest was going to college. And something, I don't remember what, but something triggered me to try writing memoir. I don't know what it is. I wish I knew. Maybe it was Abigail Thomas, her vignette style. Not really sure. Something triggered me. I clearly felt I needed a purpose because my children, my homemaking, I ran book clubs, I read. I had intellectual conversations, but I didn't have anything beyond motherhood and homemaking as a primary focus. So something triggered me and I decided to try it. And then it worked out and I really, really love it. And it has become a passion and a purpose. And I don't know how I could survive emotionally and psychologically without it. I'm 58 now, so it's been 8 years.
Can you tell me a little about that? You said you don't feel like you could survive without it. What does that mean to you?
I was thinking, what am I doing with so much hyperbole? But what I mean is, I wouldn't be a fulfilled person. I would be an empty husk walking around looking for something to fill me, to engage me, to allow me to contribute to my community and to the world. For me, writing is both a pleasure and a contribution. So I love writing. I love how it makes me feel. I love shaping words, sentences, making narrative art. I love that so much. But I also feel like having a conversation with my community and the world around me, and I'm contributing ideas and thoughts and maybe even entertainment. And that makes me feel positive about myself as I'm entering the third, maybe, hopefully, I have another third of my life left. And I've also been reading a lot about how women, after their kids leave, if they have kids, or after menopause, or what have you, they enter a stage of freedom and liberation to create and to live differently. And I really see that with me. I didn't know it was happening and I didn't plan it, but it happened.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I think what it's making me think of is that I was listening to a podcast episode so a little while ago. I think it was on Marie Forleo's podcast, and she had a neuroscientist on. And I'll try to find that so I can add it to the show notes. But what she talks about is how there is a pruning process that happens when we are reaching menopause and perimenopause. So, as those hormonal shifts happen, we actually are losing certain brain cells so that others can take over, and they redirect our motivations. Right. So often for many women, though not all, I'm a person who does not have children. When we have more estrogen in our body and more progesterone, our bodies are geared more towards caring for others. And as those hormones let up, right, as we go through this shift, that desire to nurture others changes, right? It's not as powerful. We become more willing to look inward, right? And to care for ourselves and to really think about what is our identity beyond some of the identities that perhaps we were given or we were conditioned into because of what society expects from us. And so, yeah, it makes sense to me that that is your experience. And I have talked to so many women who feel the same way, right? They get to this stage of life and creativity and generation becomes this huge part of who they are and what they do. So I want to focus this a little on your book because you said, I've been a lifelong feminist. The title of your book is A Portrait of a Feminist, right? So that's in the title and it's part of who you are. But not everybody understands what that word means. Or I will also say that word means different things to different people. So when you say I'm a lifelong feminist and you talk about being a feminist as in terms of this book, what do you mean?
At its core, my feminism has always been the same thing. It's always meant the same thing, but it's evolved with my own personal
Mhm.
development and with my education and with life experience. So for me, it's just really obvious before you get into like political boxes and power struggles and, life within patriarchy. But to me, it's a very humanist philosophy where everybody is a person who's worth the same thing. That's worth the same things, the same amount. They're valuable in exactly the same ways. It's not man against woman. It's not husband against wife or whatever binaries. It's so outside that. We as humans have erected these walls around us that are really hard to see. You can't see through them. They're really hard to see over them. They're really hard to see at all. Like we don't even know that there's walls around us. But feminism to me is a philosophy that where you observe and you analyze and you strategize and you craft and you create and you brainstorm outside of those walls, outside of those boxes, as human beings that are interconnected, and not only with each other, but with the planet, with other creatures, with flora and fauna. To me, it's just truly out of the box, not tethered to prejudices and expectations and norms and belief systems that try to put people into hierarchies of worth and value and power. I've had so many conversations where people are like, well, if you're a feminist, you hate men. And I'm like, I don't know how you could even get more reductive than that. It's so reductive, and a definition of feminism. It's the opposite, actually. And in my book, I write about the fact that I plan to have, if I had kids, I was going to have girls. I don't know how I thought I was going to control that, but that was going to be it. I was going to have girls and they were going to be little mini me's, and I was going to teach them everything, and they were going to learn from me, and we were going to redefine identity and gendered roles, and it was going to be amazing. And I didn't have any girls. I had two sons. So post motherhood, post having my children, I'm much more consciously aware that patriarchy and systems of thought that limit identity are harmful to everybody, even to those who ostensibly hold the positions of power.
Yeah, so what I hear is that it is non-hierarchical. It is about defining power in terms of equality, right? It doesn't matter who you are or what you do, everyone has equal value, and you have freedom to do whatever it is that you want to do, and no one is above anyone else, right? So I think this is something that I have a personal story about that I will share in terms of feminism. And I almost put it in quotes because that's how it felt at the time. That, there's this misguided notion that if you're a feminist, that you think that women are better than men, or that you hate men, right? You're a man hater. I mean, that gets talked about a lot. I've actually seen, people try to depict feminists in almost gender neutral, or in these ways that are masculinized, right? So this very masculine way of seeing it, and that's not necessarily the truth. And I remember when I was a kid, I think I was maybe 7 years old. I think that's about how old I was. So 7 or 8 years old. And I grew up in the late 70s and 80s. So this was probably around 1982. And I lived in this small town in upstate New York. And I'm not exactly sure what prompted this, but I went to a neighbor's house and I was asking, was so and so home, wanted to play with their kid. And the dad came out and he was shaking his fist at me because I was pretty new into the neighborhood. He said, "Are you one of those feminists?" And he had his hand up like, "If you're one of those feminists, I'm going to knock you out." And I didn't know what to say. And I didn't even know what a feminist was at that time. So I was like, "I don't know. No." He's like, "Good. You better not become one." And it was so powerful to me. It was so strange too. But I think that fear, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about what do you mean by this, because there are so many misguided notions about what that word means, how people are using it. And I think especially when people think about, I don't know, woke culture, that's a word that you'll hear, like this, this term woke culture, and that it means that we're redefining things in ways that are negative. But it is a deconstruction of the hierarchy that we are currently living in. That is true. But it's about creating more equality and more opportunity for everyone, not just women, but all people, and really caring for the planet. So, thinking about that definition, and I'm thinking about the prologue of your book and how you're talking about you're an instructor, you have these lessons, you ask your students this, question about what is a feminist, and how this book in a way is a series of lessons or an instruction manual around what it means to be a feminist. So how did you view this book, which is a memoir and essays, as perhaps an instruction manual on feminism, or do you see it in a different way?
I see it in a different way. I see it as showing through my own experiences how individual and nuanced and complicated and complex and multi-layered and multifaceted a feminist can be. Life as a feminist, life as a woman first, and then feminism is another layer. What I wanted to show was moments in my life. That's why I think the essay works best, because each essay is a chapter that pretty much could stand alone, but represents a moment in my life that affected my feminism. Like, I had a beta reader say, "There's nothing feminist about this book except that one chapter where she rescued her friend." I was like, again, what I'm trying to do is complicate in a good way, study and look at what feminism is. And I use my own life as an example. So watching somebody else go through something affected me and my ideas of what it meant to be a girl or a woman, what it means to want equality. I use equality, but it's problematic term because it's limited and it has a lot of assumptions around it these days. But anyways, let's just use equality. So it's not so much a how-to or instruction manual. It's more like, look at the attention that we must pay to ourselves, our lives, other people, what our position is in different contexts. Where do I have privilege? Where do I not have privilege? Where am I invisible? Where do I have a voice? And why? Why? That to me is so key. Analyze, become self aware, observe, be always interrogating your own positionality, trying to interrogate the self. And again, not interrogate like in a bad way, but question, observe, study. If you do that to the self and you become self aware, that to me is part of an evolution of the human psyche. I think the biggest message that I have with my book is I want readers to see what the world looks like, including their own lives and their own selves, if they step outside of the box. And I want to make the point that any identity, any movement, any philosophy is very complex and shifting. I had to learn this. When I was young, I was a very rigid and binaristic feminist. And I had to learn that it's more shape shifting and kaleidoscopic. I mean, the parts are all there, but they're shifting and moving. And it's less about this is the only right way all the time. And this is the only wrong way all the time. I want my book to like represent complexity and nuance and thoughtfulness around identity, especially the gendered one.
Yeah. And so you chose the Memoir-in-Essays, which means that each piece is self contained on its own. Together, they tell a larger story. And through that form, you're able to look at this concept of feminism through different lenses, through different angles, so that you can develop that more complex definition of what that is, or that more complex experience of what it is, that it is somewhat shape shifting. And I would imagine for you, as someone who has spent time in so many different places, right? So part of your life was in Peru, part of it was in Ecuador, part of it was in the United States. You know, you have a father who's an atheist, you have a mother who's a Peruvian Catholic. So there's a lot of different identities that you have been navigating your whole life. How do all of those identities that you have inhabited or been exposed to, whether you inhabit them or not, how have they changed your understanding of what feminism is, or maybe how you inhabit it?
This is at the beginning of my book because it is foundational to my identity as a feminist. But I grew up as the self defined protector and lawyer for my mother against my dad. So I think that my feminism was kind of honed against that dynamic. When I was very, very young, I was like, this is not right. This is not fair. And I would argue for my mom to my dad. And so that was already toggling between two extreme personalities, which were my parents. My mother absorbed and internalized, and I partially internalized it because I was so close to my mom. For so many years, I internalized an ideal beauty that had to do with hyperfemininity. It was erased ideal beauty in that for her, it was straight hair, not curly. It was don't be too outspoken, don't be too loud, always dress appropriately, don't be tacky. I totally internalized a lot of that for many years. And that's why I think that I'm genetically a feminist, because always in my core, there was this sense of, okay, but that's not real. You know, there's this other way of being. I can see why my mother's that way, and I can see why I want to be that way, but it is a construct. So I think growing up, to your question, growing up with different cultural influences and in different countries, I went to missionary school, I went to catechism, I went to evangelical missionary school, I went to Catholic catechism classes, I went to Catholic school for high school, and my dad was an atheist. So I saw how ideal femininity and ideal masculinity is not only a general construct, but it's also specific constructs in specific subcultures. So ideal femininity looks different in Peru in the 1980s, definitely in the 1960s, than it does here on the West Coast, California. You can pick any community or group, and gender constructs will look different. And I think I was absorbing that lesson even before I went to university and grad school, where we studied that very overtly. That's what living those different cultures taught me.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we can dive a little into your book and talk about wrinkles, which was one of the essays. I absolutely love that, which is about your mom and her sister and about beauty, right? And so many of the essays are about the gaze, right? Sometimes it's about the impact of the male gaze onto, you as a woman. Sometimes it's about your gaze and how you're looking at other people, how you're seeing yourself. That shows up so much. But I wonder, could you tell us a little about that essay, which is so beautiful, so that we can talk about what you were hoping to accomplish and how you wrote that essay, which deals with these issues that you've just been talking about?
I think I wrote that essay because of the massive impact that the cosmetic industry has on women, from cosmetic surgery to makeup to potions and lotions. And my mom did have a facelift and a tummy tuck, and my aunt did not. Her sister did not. And I was trying to figure out why, because my aunt is extremely superficial and materialistic. I mean, she has other qualities, obviously, but she's even more superstitious than my mom. She has even more idea of ideal femininity that has to be a certain way. But she never had plastic surgery. And whenever it would come up, it would be that her beloved husband, who loved her so much and she loved him so much, was scared. Why go under the knife for something like wrinkles? So she never did, but my mother did, and she looked fabulous. She looked amazing. And I knew why my mother did that. And I was happy for her that she felt great. But it's an exploration. That whole essay, that whole chapter is an exploration of how, again, looking out of the box. What if we were aliens coming to this planet? What would we think about fake breasts and facelifts and tummy tucks and fillers and Botox? It's become so normalized, but it's really not that normal if you step outside the box.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not judging. I wear makeup. I love wearing makeup. I love picking my clothes out and thinking about colors. And I insisted on wearing my wedge sandals in Marrakesh this last spring, even though I fell 3 times in the first 2 days because of all the potholes. But
Yeah.
still, I wanted to wear my wedges. I felt happy and cute in my wedges, so I wore them. I just learned to be careful when I was walking. But I'm not saying that caring about your appearances cosmetically is bad. Dressing up, makeup. I think it becomes an industry, it becomes very misogynist when people have themselves cut open, when they risk all kinds of things, complications, infections. The author of the First Wives Club, she died on the plastic surgeon's operating table.
Yeah.
But again, nuance, and again, understanding why we are the way we are. What influences us? Why do we think this way? Why was my mother so invested in me having straight hair? Why was she so invested in my sister having blonder hair? Because my sister's very light compared to me. Why was she so invested in my sister having blonder hair and putting highlights in it? Why did she go for it and have a facelift, and her sister, who's more materialistic, did not? And by the end of that essay, I do venture some answers. Of course, you can never really know, but I venture some answers. So that whole essay is just, it's an exploration of why we are what we are, why we do what we do, why we have these pressures. And maybe ultimately it'll be liberating to understand from the outside looking in our own motivations. That's my hope.
Yeah. And what I hear in the way that you have approached your own writing is that you've had these big ideas, right, that you want to explore. Why are some of us gravitating towards cosmetic surgery? What does that say about how we've been conditioned in terms of what is beautiful, right? And who gets to say what beautiful is, right? And what do we internalize around beauty? So you had these big ideas, and then you had to figure out what stories from your life illustrated the big ideas that you had. And I think, I don't know if this is correct, so I'm going to check in with you. I'm wondering if, because you work as an academic, you have this academic background, if what I would consider to be more deductive reasoning, I think that's the right word, deductive reasoning, where you have the big idea and then you're breaking it down, if that feels like a more natural way to approach the work, whereas someone else might, just collect a bunch of stories and say, okay, well, what does this say? What was your process?
Well, that's a really good question for my history because I was an academic and I had to learn that whole new language of academia. The jargon. You never use I except to say I argue or I posit. It's very different. It's a whole new language, it's a whole other discourse. But my PhD is incredibly informed by feminism, race studies, queer theory, race theory, feminist theory, gender studies. I mean, I did it all. And I had this idea that I wanted to write a memoir, and myself is so saturated with feminism that I cannot separate myself from my feminism. I can't. So I did actually try to do a more traditional linear narrative memoir. And I gave it to a writing coach, and she immediately was like, way too much telling, way too many academic words just popping up here and there,
Yeah.
and not enough showing. So then I was like, oh my God. And then I read this book by Lisa Dale Norton called Shimmering Images. It's a craft book. And her whole thing is the shimmering images, the scenes that don't leave you alone, the moments that you remember that come up in the middle of the night, if you bite into a chocolate chip cookie, those are shimmering images. And because they shimmer and they're always hovering, there's something to them. So she
Yeah.
recommended starting with a shimmering image. It really worked for me. It really worked. So the wrinkle starts out with me looking at a photo of my uncle and my aunt. And I know that she's very wrinkly, unlike my mom. And then from that little moment of observing comes all of these other memories that are connected around the theme of gendered pressure to look a certain way and to spend money and to risk your health sometimes. So I just kind of revamped my whole structure. And I took a little writing class at the writing salon in San Francisco. And the instructor, who was amazing for that for me, was Kathleen McClung. And every 2 weeks, we had to write 2,000 words around a prompt that was based on a reading. So that worked so well for me. First of all, I'm really a very earnest student, so I could never not do the homework. Then I would take the prompt and just angle it to have something to do with feminism and identity. And then we read it out loud. We handed out a copy to everybody and we read it out loud, and everybody read it along with the writer. And then they all talked about it for 20 minutes after. And that really trained me to write at least an outline of a complete essay every 2 weeks. Then COVID happened and all hell broke loose, as you know. And for
Yeah.
some reason, I just became incredibly productive. I wrote so much because I was already on that roll. So I just took it and ran. I wrote and wrote and wrote. A lot of the essays in this book, Portrait of a Feminist, are from that time. So I got seeing in, I got showing as well as telling. I got better reflection and musing in by being trained in this format. And so far, I love it. I'm still with it.
Oh, I love that format that you're talking about. And what I hear is that, at one point you tried to create something that felt more linear. It just wasn't working. So you went to this idea of the shimmer, right? And so you began collecting these shimmering moments for you, these moments that haunted you. That photograph of your aunt and uncle, where they look so in love, and she's so wrinkly and old, right? Which, when we think about what is ideal beauty, it's not old, right? So, at least that's how we're trained. And so you took those shimmers and then you began to say, what is the angle that I can apply to it? So, how can I apply this feminist angle to this shimmer that haunts me? And then, of course, I think this was true for a lot of people. I mean, it was kind of, I would say this was somewhat a binary for a lot of people. There were some people who wrote just a massive amounts during the pandemic. It was a highly productive time for them. And then other people, they couldn't get anything done. I think life was just felt too much. And so you fell in that camp where the world fell away to a certain extent and the shimmers became more vivid. And so you were able to engage with those. And as you did that and you followed this practice of creating an essay, so many essays again and again and again. And so much of writing is practice, right? And rewriting and doing it again and again and again. And as you did that, you began to hone the skills that helped you write this book. And now you're in the middle of your launch, right? So your book recently launched, it's out in the world. You are in your launch year, which many people consider to be the gauntlet. So, how are you caring for yourself in, let's say, a feminist way as you are launching a book, which involves a lot of promotion, trying to get your work out there? It's like a very, I don't know, external way that we have to be when we're in the book launch year. What are you doing to care for yourself?
I am really good at caring for myself, if I do say so myself. Early on, starting with grad school, I was like, every day I'm going to have my cup of tea, or more than one. Every day I'm going to sit in a patch of sun. Every day I'm going to watch the TV that soothes me. Like, even when I had kids, even when I was writing my dissertation, even in the past 20 years as a hands-on mom, I always had time for that. Not only does it keep me sane, it makes life better. Like, I grew up in some cultures that are not like the United States. It's not go, 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 go. If I'm not harried and
Yeah.
sweating, then I'm not being productive, and that's bad. No, that was not always my model. And I resist that. I resist it. I'll do what I do when I do it, and I'll do it well, but it doesn't mean that I have to overextend myself. I know a lot of people can do so many things at once and they thrive. That's great, but that's not me. So I've always done that. In terms of the launch year, I am learning for myself what I read about and heard about so much, which is it does take away from the writing. It's really a shame for me because I'm not a natural salesperson. I feel awkward. I'm a lifelong reader and an academic. And to me, it's the writing that speaks for itself, not the writer, the author having to hawk her wares. I'm just continually saying to myself, I'm not the kind of author and I don't have the kind of platform where just doing a million things all the time, every day is going to be helpful to selling books. So I'm trying to strategize how I sell my books. And I'm also consciously doubling down on, hey, let's go sit out on the patio because it's sunny. And there's some butterflies that finally came to your garden after you planted the butterfly attracting bushes. And let's have the cup of tea and let's talk maybe on the phone
Yeah.
with somebody.
I love that. I think those are all really great strategies. And I love how, for you, because you grew up in other countries that didn't have the same sense of time, the same sense of urgency that perhaps we do in the United States, cultures are different. And so you're able to use what you learned from these other cultures as part of your operating system. And it's also part of the operating system that you're using as you sell this book, right? You're thinking about what's that one or two thing that I could do versus what are the 10,000 things that I could do. And so, how can I do that effectively? So, you're really focusing on how can you do things effectively? Well, I want people to get a chance to read your book and look at all you've done around feminism and how you are helping us understand that inward and outward gaze through your beautiful stories, which are still with me. I'm still thinking about them even today. So, if people want to connect with you, they want to learn more about what you do, and they want to buy a copy of A Portrait of a Feminist, what are the best ways for them to connect with you?
I have a website, mariannamarlowe.com. Marianna with two N's and Marlowe with an E at the end. And if you want to connect with me, absolutely, I would love it if you came and left me a message and started a dialogue. That would be amazing. To buy my book, I recommend ordering it from a local bookstore or if you go online, bookshop.org. The book is also readily available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
All of those things will be in the show notes. So, yes, listeners, connect with Marianna, find out more about what she's up to, and most importantly, have a dialogue, right? That is something that I think is an incredibly feminist thing to do because it is about that sense of connection. So, please be sure to connect so that you can learn more about what she's up to and hopefully hear her sometime as she is promoting her book and doing all of the things. So one or two things that she does well during her book launch. Well, thank you so much, Marianna, for being here on the podcast today. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm just wishing you all the best with your book.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all your communication and your work you do with the writing community. I love your newsletter and the way you promote writers by saying, share your milestones, share your publications. I love that community that you've been building.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being a part of that community. It's just, that's what makes this so special is that you've been a part of that community. We've had all of these dialogues over the years. I've gotten a chance to read your essays that have been published. And now we got to announce the book in my newsletter. And today you're on the show. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Marianna and most importantly, buy a copy of Portrait of a Feminist, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, I would love it if you would text the show if you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or leave a comment on YouTube with the answer to the following question. What is one form of feminist self-care that you are practicing? I would love to hear your answer. And speaking of your answers and your comments, I want to give a special shout out to Wendy Kennar, Kim Adams, and Candace Coakley for your kind notes that you sent to me about my episode on pivoting. And I'd also like to thank Jim T6V, IW9338, and Michael Nortness, who left comments on YouTube with your rave reviews for my conversation with Ingrid Clayton. It was so great to hear from all of you. And listeners, if you haven't reached out to the show, I'd love to hear from you too. Until next time, please remember that your story matters. Exploring its truth and allowing yourself to be authentically who you are as you work on it is how you will write and live the story that sets you free. And I can't wait to see where that takes you. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways that you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review so others can find the show. 3, join my engaged dynamic community by signing up for the Writing and Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Ditch Your Inner Critic, 5 tools to transform self-doubt into self-support. Until next time, remember that your story matters. As you write and connect with the truest, most authentic version, you become not just the writer, but the person you're meant to be. And that, my friends, is the real freedom writing can offer.